Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of SuperCoach Mates. Well, we have returned from the dead. We've both had very busy terms, obviously being in the education system, and Thomas has enjoyed a nice getaway, but we are back, hopefully, weekly going forward. So as per normal, I am joined by Thomas. How have you been, other than your very busy term and whatnot? How have you been otherwise? How's your football perspectives at the minute?
Yeah, not too bad. It was pretty chaotic. Kind of couple, more than a couple of weeks, basically knocked me out. But pretty much the opening couple of rounds of the footy season, which made it hard to obviously produce content with both of us being so busy, and then me being overseas for the last couple of weeks, obviously made it even more challenging to put content together. But we're back together. So yeah, it's been good. Try to be watching the footy as much as I can. Was a little bit hard to watch overseas, considering that I was out and about most of the time when the games were happening. But it was nice to see St Kilda string 2 of the 3 wins that I was away for, and that was nice and unexpected, to be honest, because considering a lot of people would St Kilda tip down the bottom 4, but it's yet to be seen whether that actually eventuates or not. But nice to see St Kilda actually doing well for once, which is nice, and nice to see Collingwood also near the top of the table as well. That'd make Nathan pretty happy, I'm sure.
Top 4.
Yeah, so we'll see come the finals and where that kind of eventuates. But yeah, as we said, we've been super busy with kind of external commitments. So apologies for not being as active as we can, but hopefully now on we can kind of stick to weekly uploads and team reviews as they come along each week. But to kick things off, we're kind of going to wrap together the first 1 to 5 rounds with some stats that Nathan's put together with his research and what he's obviously analysed, not only with teams and things like that, but also specific players that might shed some light on if they're going super well in SuperCoach or not so well in SuperCoach. So we did this a little bit in the final series last year, but to bring this one up, Nathan, what's kind of caught your eye in the first kind of rounds 1 to 5, or if you include opening round as well? Yeah, basically from round 0 to round 5.
Yeah, so I've got a couple of things here. So last year in the final series, we looked at the turnover game, and basically every single final was won by the team that won the turnover game, which, just as a plain summary, is basically what you score on turnover versus what you concede on turnover. So this year, I just quickly want to present. So this year, the top 5 teams after the first 5 weeks, there's probably no surprises here. So Gold Coast are number 1. And then we've got Adelaide, Collingwood, GWS, and Geelong, who are rounding out the top 5. Unfortunately for you, Thomas, your Saints are down in 14th. So there's marketed improvement for there. So next thing I just want to quickly touch on, again, we spoke about this a little bit in the finals series last year. So chaos versus control. So basically, a chaos game means that there's more ground ball gets than there are marks, and a control game is obviously the opposite. There's more marks than ground ball gets. So far this year, from the 44 games we've had, 24 games have been chaos games and 19 games have been control games. And there's been one game that's been a neutral game where they've been both the same. But if we just go back to those top 5 sides, so that I mentioned before, only 5 of those games, so only 5 of the 19 games have actually involved those 5 sides that I mentioned before. So not St Kilda. So that means that basically every other game that those sides have played, so what's that? So 5. So like the other sort of 15 or 16 games that they're played in have all been chaos games, which, as we touched on last year in the final series, I think 80% of finals games are this chaos game where there's a lot more ground ball gets. So this sort of matches in well with, with how your side's going in the turnover game. The fact that a lot of those teams there are not playing in control games, they're playing in sort of the more high turnover games, which is sort of more the finals way of doing it. The side I want to highlight though from this is Essendon. Now, statistically, Essendon haven't been great for about 10 years, to be perfectly honest with you. But part of the reason why I think they get sort of picked on a little bit is I think it's the way that they play. So this year so far, every single one of Essendon's games has been a control game. Now, the control game is all good and well if you're able to actually possess the ball. But if that gets taken away from you, Essendon don't have a great record in chaos games. So although they're probably going to play in a control game this week against West Coast, given that, everyone's beating West Coast at the minute, I think Anzac Day is going to be a real test for this control game. I don't know how Essendon are going to fare if this ends up being a really high pressure, high chaos game. So that's just one to keep a watch on from from that perspective. And I just want to give a little shout out just before we start the sorry, my cat's in the way. Just before we start the vice captaincy stuff, just want to give a little shout out here to Jack Sinclair and Sire Wanganeen Malera, who I'm sure Thomas is absolutely thriving over watching. Right now, they're actually the top 2 rated general defenders in the AFL, which is a big reason why St Kilda perhaps are winning, a lot of their games. And we are going to touch on this later on in the vice captaincy options, but I've got some more stats to present about some players who perhaps opposition clubs should be tagging and perhaps how this leads to going forward. So, some of the names down the bottom there. So Sinclair, Sarong, just to name a few. So we'll probably touch on that more in the vice captain bit. But yeah, that's sort of how everything's statistically standing at the minute. Obviously, I will be tracking this as the year goes on just to see if there's any anomalies or anything that's sort of matching up. But right now, if I had to pick right now, if I had to pick probably a top 4, I'm probably going Gold Coast, Collingwood, GWS, and Geelong as my top 4 at the minute. In no specific order. Adelaide, yes, they are number 2 in this turnover game, but they're 12th defensively, which historically doesn't sort of stack up. So yeah, that's sort of where everything's standing at the minute statistically. And of course, all of these stats are from Wheelo Ratings and Champion Data. So huge shout out to Wheelo Ratings for providing these stats on their website. It is a literal Bible for anyone who is statistically geared like myself, because these are obviously direct stats straight from Champion Data. So yeah, that's sort of statistically where things are sort of standing after the first 5 weeks of football.
Yeah, nice. I guess Nathan can bring these statistical standpoints, which obviously from an AFL perspective is very interesting for those stats geeks out there, but also can give you a bit of insight into perhaps how you may select some players outside of the scoring potential and all that. If the statistical basis is there from the teams that are flying, then obviously that might correlate to some of those players or premiums, especially that you might want to bring in, that might help your team further improve. So we'll keep bringing out these stats on a weekly basis, hopefully, and hopefully that'll give a bit of analysis both from an AFL perspective, from how your team might be going, and also from a SuperCoach standpoint as well. But before we kind of talk about more round 6, I'll just give you an update of how I'm going personally in the SuperCoach landscapes. I'm just going to bring up my team in a minute. Where is it? So if I just bring this up, so if we bring this up here. This is basically from rounds 1 to 5. How opening round, how I've gone so far. So I started off horrendously, scoring 2062 to start off round 1, which was very disappointing. I think I missed out a lot of rookies, which was the disappointing part. And I had to make those adjustments with my first boost come round 2, and then basically, as you guys would have been aware, from rounds 2 to 4. That was when the best 18 was happening. So I wasn't planning exactly to build a team around that best 18, but just coincidentally, that helped me rank wise very positively. So yeah, basically round 2 scored 2061, which was a huge plus. Finished that round inside the top 1,000 for that week, and then that bombed me up into the top 10K, which is what I needed. Those 3 trades were basically all rookie correction trades, bringing in the likes of Nathan O'Driscoll, Xavier Lindsay, those type of players. Unfortunately, they didn't last very long in my side with injuries, but that definitely helped my rank. And then round 3 was a bit of a downer with regards to the best 18. I think I had a few premium scores that really didn't fire. I think Lachie Neale was one of them that got tagged out of that game. I'm pretty sure that was the week that he played Sydney, where he pretty much got tagged out of it completely. So that really stuffed my round up. Then back to plus 2,000 scores in round 4. That was the last of the bye rounds, and 2012 I scored there, which was positive. Again, starting to bring in some players there that really helped my side. Brought Bailey Smith in, which was positive, and some other rookies that helped with some cash generation. That put me up into top 5K. And then this round scored a 2268, which was positive, and then that pushed me back up into inside the top 3K using 2 trades. Last week, I think I brought in Christian Moraes from Port Adelaide, and I believe it was, if I just bring up my team now, believe it was, I'm just trying to think who I did my trades on. Oh, it was Clay Hall and Lachie Whitfield I brought in, sorry. So Christian Moraes and Bailey Smith was the week before. So that's how my team is stacking up at the moment. So, yeah, it's not looking too bad. I think early days, especially in the first opening rounds, the lack of premium defenders really hurt. But obviously, if you were paying attention in SuperCoach for the last couple of weeks, the rookies have basically completely flipped, and we'll talk about that a little bit later, like Trainer, Zach Reed, Riley Bice. They're scoring 80s to 90s now and have done on consecutive weeks. So that really helped a little bit, having space for these rookies to come on field, whereas other teams had to kind of restructure again, having had so many premium defenders. Midfield's probably where it's hurt a little bit the most with Lachie Neale, having had him starting him at 600 plus K, which was really frustrating, and then him having dropped all the way down to 550. But I'm hoping that he can bounce back and be the Lachie Neale of old in the next coming weeks. Andrew Brayshaw started a little bit slowly for my liking with his kind of low hundreds, but completely bombed up in scoring, and with my captain this week and scored a 155, which was very, very handy. Rosie was pretty much out the door last week, but didn't really have the trades to facilitate a trade with him, and ended up keeping him, and he ended up being on the half back line against that Hawks game. I don't know if you watched that game, Nathan, but he dominated off that line, and he almost looks like a trade-in option for some people with the, scoring that well in a kind of a new role where he's not being tagged. I don't know if that's sustainable or not, if Ken Hinkley does change the magnets a little bit there, but 137. And then, other than that, pretty stock standard forward line. Horn Francis held faith in him, and he kind of repaid a little bit, scoring 150 against St Kilda and then 119 this week. Rankin, McRae, Daniel, Davidson, Hall, pretty stock standard forward line compared to most teams out there. But hopefully, I'll talk about my trades later in the episode when we talk about vice captain and captaincy options, but that's where I'm looking at the moment. Hopefully, I know I've burnt through a fair few trades there at this stage of the competition, but I'm hoping that that'll keep me in good stead, because I was, well behind the 8 ball come opening round when I didn't have the likes of those O'Driscolls, Xavier Lindsay's, those money makers on field. which really hurt my cash generation. But hopefully now I've kind of recouped that a little bit with the trades that I had to burn through early, and hopefully that'll keep me in good stead as the season wears on. But obviously, Nathan, you're heavily into your draft as well. How's your season going today?
Yeah, well, I'll quickly start off with classic. So, I've got my team up on my second monitor now. Unfortunately, you guys can't see it. But basically, I've got a lot of the sort of the players who everyone's had at the start of the year. So I'm reasonably happy with my team, even though I sort of am doing more the draft scene as I did last year.
Mm-hmm.
So. Yeah, in terms of sort of where I'm sitting, so I've got three sort of main defenders. I've got probably 4 or 5 main midfielders. I've got the 2 rucks, and I've got I would say the 4 forwards now with Caleb Daniel. I guess for me, the frustrating thing is that Flynn has been dropped from West Coast for the past few weeks. I don't know if he's going to get back in because I think he was my flex player. So that's sort of where I'm sitting with classic at the minute. I'm glad I held on to Zach Reed. I think a lot of people might have traded him out after his first couple of games when he basically, shit the bed. But the last few weeks have been really positive, and then obviously scoring 104 on the weekend. His break even now is -60. So if you held on to Zach Reed like I have done, you're probably going to reap the rewards now because he's probably going to get close to 350k. Which is probably a boom for that, considering the fact that you probably wouldn't have expected that from him. But yeah, as I said, my main sort of thing has been the draft league now for a couple of years now. So I'm flying in draft league. I'm on top. I only lost the one game, which I think was only by about sort of 20 odd points. If I get it up correctly, I think it was only about sort of the 20 odd points. Let me just get it up real quick. No, it was by about 150 points, which obviously wasn't ideal. But I think that was the week the Giants and the Gold Coast had their buys, and I do have a few players from those clubs who obviously missed out. So I think that did impact my score. But yeah, recovered really well. I'm on top now in the league, as I said. So we're flying in that. And yeah, as I said, I'm sort of more leaning towards the draft league, but I do keep my eye on classic every sort of so often. But yeah, obviously, as I said, I'm probably not as sort of thing with classic as I am with sort of the draft. But yeah, obviously, a lot of the stats and the stuff that we do are probably more geared towards the classics thing anyway.
Yep.
So yeah, I think as we're going to touch on, I think there are a few good players now who are reasonably cheap, who you might want to sort of look at getting in. I think guys like I'm sure we're going to touch on them later on, but I think guys like Cleary and whatnot, I think they just have to come in this week. But I think we're going to talk about them sort of soonish. But yeah, that's sort of where I'm standing at the minute.
Yeah, for sure. And we spoke about this last as well. Nathan's heavily into his draft, so hopefully across the upcoming weeks, Nathan can also give some pointers with those of you who do play draft with mates and whatnot, which is obviously a different kind of perspective to classic and a different kind of way or style of playing, but obviously something that's very important as well. But with no further ado, let's bring up his screen again, just so we can bring on to our top 3 trade out targets for round 6. So we'll kind of go through these one by one and give both our opinions on them, and talk about any other players that trade out targets. This obviously differs to kind of later in the season, as you would have seen our podcast late last year, where rather than trading out premiums, you're looking to trade out rookies that at this point have either kind of maxed out to some degree or are really not making any money at all. And on the flip side, trading out premiums, you got to obviously be a little bit careful with how you want to do that, because obviously you looked at the likes of, for example, Horn, Francis, and Rosie. Everyone wanted to hit the rage trade button immediately after their poor scores, and they really turned it around 360 degrees, especially Rosie last week and Horn Francis for the last 2 weeks. So it's one of those things you want to be really careful with, trading out some premiums, but mid prices as well, you want to be a little bit wary of how they're going as well. You don't want them to be, stalling that cash projection and then all cash rise. So yeah, it's something that you got to be really careful of. But yeah, starting off that list there, Jack Henderson, priced at 166.9k, break even at 55. Look, he has a pretty good fixture coming up, bar that Freo game. So he's got Tigers and West Coast. But I think I'd be interested to hear your thoughts, Nathan, because you probably watched a bit more footy than I have in the last few weeks. But what's your thoughts on Henderson? Obviously, plays that small forward role for Melbourne, but he got subbed out last week, from my understanding, and might not even get a game this week. Is it pretty much time to go, or is it one of those things where there's maybe other rookies out there that have made a bit more money that you can make a bit more profit on? Because if you look at Henderson, he started off at that 99.9k, whatever that basement price is. So he's only risen about 60 to 70k. Not that kind of 150k you're looking out for. But what are your thoughts on Henderson?
Yeah, I think if there's one place right now I wouldn't want to be playing, it's the Melbourne forward line. They are just an absolute basket case up forward, and I think he probably is a victim of that. So yes, I think Henderson unfortunately does probably have to go. But given the fact that he started at that bargain basement price, and the fact that he is a midfield forward, you might even be able to just keep him, and sort of use him as a bit of a swing player. If you've got guys like like Horn Francis or McRae, and you need them up in the midfield, it is always good to sort of have someone with that DPP flexibility. And also because there's the 3 midfield spots, I feel like that, he's probably going to be in and out of Melbourne's side, but I mean, they've got to regenerate this Melbourne side. So, I feel like, he's part of that, although he is a mature ager at 26 years old. But yeah, Melbourne is sort of in a bit of a, I don't know, they're in a bit of a interesting phase at the minute, Melbourne. So like last week they had the third oldest list in the AFL, and I think Henderson is a mature age. I think he's 26, Henderson.
Yeah, I think that's what you said.
Yeah,
before.
he's 26 years old. So, realistically, he's probably not really the type of player that Melbourne need at the minute, to be honest. I think they need to blood a few younger kids. But given the fact of how badly they're going at the minute, I think they will literally just try and get anyone who can sort of get in there and hopefully sort of start changing around their fortune. So, yeah, as I said, if you had him, I think he's probably, yes, you probably should get rid of him, but again, he might end up being useful as that sort of M11 or that, what is it, 1, 2, M11, as that DPP who you can switch between the midfield and the forward line. If you get an injury further down the, an injury further down the year, and you run out of trades, he might end up being useful in that sense. So, I think, yes, you have to get rid of him. But if you've got other priorities, you can probably just keep him and use him as that swing player. I think that's probably where I would stand. Are you the same, or do you think he's got to go given how bad Melbourne are going at the minute?
Yeah, I think he's one of those ones where, look, you're not going to make overly too much money trading him down to anyone substantial. Like, you're making a guy that costs, 110 to 120k or 125k, you're going to make yourself 40 to 50k. So it's not a huge amount of money. but I think he's one that's really stalled in his cash gen. Break even at 55. His average is 43. He's only scored one score above 60, which was round 2, and he scored a 72. Other than that, he scores a 55, 43, 32, and then that 13 subbed out game. I guess my worry, especially against a Freo, is quite strong. There's probably real concerns that, he may not get even past a 20-30, and then he's just starting to lose cash real quick. And I guess you want to probably maximize the cash gain from him now rather than wait, and then all of a sudden he's just dropping, and then you're making no money at all. And I guess you make a valid point there with regards to him being a viable loop option, which I guess you're not wrong, but I would assume a lot of people out there probably have another dud rookie as well. You'd be doing a pretty good job if Henderson was, your lowest priced rookie and the rest are flying. In that case, you probably don't have that issue that most other players have. But I think in this case, he's probably good to go and just cut your losses with him and bring in someone else like your Clearys and things like that, which we'll touch on in a little bit. But moving on to Sam Davidson, this is an interesting one because I'm tossing him up as well as a trade option to bring in a premium, and he's priced at just sub 300k. Let me just bring him up here quickly. I believe he started off at that kind of not basement price, but at that low, 113.5k. So it's definitely made a ton of money. That definitely helped with his, back-to-back good scores in round 2 and 3 of 72 and 129. His break even of 60, so it's definitely manageable. But if you look at his last 2 scores, 54 and 61, it's pretty much around that break even. So if you judge it off the last 2 games, he's not making you much money at all, or he's basically stalled that price. But what are your thoughts? Because I believe that 129 came in against Carlton, where he just dominated that wing, and he looked electric. I remember watching that game, and it was up and down that wing, had a massive work rate on him, and he just kept getting the ball. And I wouldn't be surprised if that's something that happens against St Kilda. It's at Marvel as well, same ground. And I guess St Kilda's not the one to, where the opposition team are going to struggle to get the ball. But what are your thoughts on this one? Is it one of those scenarios where it's going to bite you in the bum a little bit and he scores another spike game and then shoots up to, even close to a 400k mark? Or do you reckon that this kind of, if you can reach a Dacos or reach a Petrarca or reach another premium, you just take your money and run with it and kind of avoid the risk of him, having a shit game on Sunday and then really stalling in price, and then even, having that problem where you missed out on the maximum potential of bringing in a premium at this price for Davidson? What are your thoughts on Davidson?
Yeah, I think that little note down the bottom there in the blue box basically probably matches my sentiments exactly. Yes, you probably can keep him. There's no harm in keeping him, unless of course he has a stinker. But if that's getting you in a premium midfielder, well, you'd probably be crazy not to move him on for a midfielder. Mm-hmm. Maybe if you're moving him on for a forward, I would perhaps say hold and give him one more chance. Unless you're basically getting in, I think most people probably have Macrae, Smith, and Daniel anyway. And I don't think there's really any other forwards who are standing out right now. Who are sort of, they're about the mark. So if I have a look at the top 5 or like the forwards, so Toby Green, perhaps you could bring in Toby Green. Sam Darcy, Rankin, hasn't really moved in price. And then you basically, so I would say if you're planning on moving Davidson on for a forward, I would, and if you've got, Macrae, Smith, and Daniel, like most of us do, and perhaps even Horn Francis, I would say probably hold him. But if you're going to use Davidson and go up to one of those big midfielders, I think you're probably crazy not to do that. So I think it just depends on what you plan with doing with him. But yes, I do agree. I think the ground will help him. So yeah, I think the only reason I'd be moving him on is if you basically don't have any other rookies on the field, and you can get a premium midfielder in for him. But if you're just moving him on for another sort of forward, I probably wouldn't entertain the idea. Just because I think there probably is still a little bit more value for him to make. But yeah, if you're going to move him on for one of those big midfielders who've fallen down in price, like a Nick Dacos, for example, yeah, you'd probably be crazy not to do that. So, yeah, I think it just depends on what you're going to do with him.
Yeah, I think in some regards you're right in suggesting that you want to be careful who you trade up to, and not wasting a trade. But I think any premium's a good premium, especially with those new DPP forwards. You've got Petrarca in there, which we'll talk about a bit later. Nick Martin's also an option there. I don't know how well he's going, but there are options out there to kind of really get those premiums on field. And I think at this time of year, especially if you're doing quite well in SuperCoach, you want to get those rookies off field ASAP. And those premiums are less likely to throw up those stinkers. And then Davidson, compared to Davidson, who we all know is very capable of scoring, 100 plus as he has done once. But on the flip side, his consistent scoring's probably shown or regressed more towards that average of 60, which probably shows that he's not going to make too much money. But I guess all he needs is one score, a spike score, especially this week. Then he's making money again. So it's definitely one to keep an eye on, and I guess one that you can go both ways. You can. At the end of the day, if it bites you in the bum, it bites you in the bum. But if it gets you a premium, it gets you a premium. So I guess either way is okay. You just want to be confident with who you're bringing in. But I guess before we go on to some other players, the third one there, Matty Roberts, someone I own and someone that's been very disappointing since a certain Riley Bias has come into the equation. Priced at 470k, he started to drop a little bit since that whole buy situation has come into to play. He started at 434,000 come opening round. He started off scoring 124.95, 115, just reading the scores there. And then after his buy and since basically Bias has come into play, 77 and 79, which is not what you want, but they're not terrible scores as well. What are your thoughts on Muddy Roberts there? Is he one that do you feel is more like, if we compare this to Davidson, for example, if we're trading, say, Roberts to a Dacos using DPP or Roberts to a Sinclair, Roberts to, Max Holmes, who are pretty much considered top 6 defenders at this point, is this a waste of a trade considering Roberts is a more of a mid-pricer, or do we want to, if you have Davidson as well, do we want to trade Davidson first, or if you don't have the money and you feel like you want to get Roberts to a Dacos or whatnot, what are your thoughts on this one? Because we all know Roberts is capable, but it seems like he's really stunted a little bit with the likes of Bice having a bit more freedom down back, and you've got the likes of McInerney, Cunningham to come back into that defensive line for the Swans. What are your thoughts on Roberts there?
Yeah, so I was in this position with I'm actually in this position with the honourable mentioned in Joel Frazier and James Short, this exact same position. So I've actually moved on Joel Frazier this week for Nick Dacos, obviously using DPP. Look, I guess the difference with Roberts, so if I have a look at Frazier, he's 358,000. So he's actually lost money on his starting price.
Yeah.
So I think I probably gave him 1 week too many. Frazier. So last week he was. Last week he went down 20. He went down 30k last week. So he was a bit of a bomb. Frazier, so I think he's just going to keep losing money. So, whereas I think Roberts, even though his break even is, I don't even know what his break even is. It's 100. His break even's 125. Yeah, that's a tricky position, that because I think there's a few guys in that position. I think it depends on what you plan on having Roberts as. If you think he can turn it around and be a top 6, top 10 defender, you're probably better off holding him. But realistically, I don't think he's probably going to be in that range. I know it's not ideal trading at mid prices, but I'd almost be tempted to break my rule of getting rookies first, and perhaps cutting him loose for someone a bit more reliable, because I think he's going to lose more money probably than any rookie will this week. I think he's going to lose a lot more money this week than what Davidson will, for example. So I think I'd rather lose maybe 5 or so K on Davidson than potentially lose 30K on Roberts, and then you're basically back to square one with Roberts. So I think if you can move him on for anyone basically that's a premium, I would probably be inclined to do that, even though it does sort of go against my rule of thumb. But yeah, Riley Bice has definitely impacted his scoring. And yeah, he's just not having the same role. So yeah, I think Roberts is the exception to the rule of getting rookies off the field first, because I think he's probably going to lose more money this week than any rookie who you probably have in your side. So yeah, I feel like just cut your losses now and move him on. And get him one of these, top 2, top 3 players in the back line. So you got like Sinclair if you didn't start with him, or Holmes. In the midfield, you've got Brayshaw, Dacos, Hugh McCluggage is having a really good start to the year and is a bit of a point of difference. So if you're gonna move him on, you've probably got to basically go to someone who you won't have to touch again for the rest of the year, barring injury. So yeah, I think that's probably where I sit with Robert. So what are you doing with him this week? Are you gonna move him on, or are you gonna give him one more go?
I think it was a tough one because I'll explain kind of my thought process with my trades at the end of the episode. But yeah, Matty Roberts, I started with him. It wasn't someone I brought in later. Unlike a Joel Frazier, who's definitely frustrating. But yeah, I think he's one that, look, he can probably get up to a defender with 2 trades. So, for example, you get rid of Henderson. Say you've got 50K in the bank, that bumps you up to 120 left over, and then you've got you can afford most defenders out there. You can get an Azar Miller, you can get a Max Holmes, and they're going to set you up pretty nicely for the rest of the year, I would say. I would be inclined to maybe give him one more week and just see how he goes. From my understanding, he actually had, let me just bring up the stats here. He had a fair bit of the ball quite late, I believe, against your lot. So, yeah, 24 disposals. I believe his disposal efficiency was pretty rubbish as well. So it's one of those ones where, can you hold him for another week? I don't know. You're right in saying that, he's going to lose a bit of money if he doesn't get close to that 125. If he hits another 70, then you're in a bit of strife there. But I think you'd be in a pretty good position if you had Roberts there as your only problem and all your rookies were firing. I think if you can get your rookies off first, I know Nath was saying that this is the exception to the rule just because of potentially the money lost and money gained in this situation. But I guess more having that scoring potential on field, with Roberts being very capable of scoring 100 as well, is one to kind of be wary of. Fraser, on the other hand, is a definite trade out if you didn't do already. I think I got rid of him last week for Whitfield. Basically saw most games he played in. I was kind of annoyed in myself because when I brought him in, I basically was locked out of trading him to anyone else because I think I brought him in quite early in the piece as soon as I got sick of Perryman, and then Fraser was playing on that Friday night. That was when he scored that last 100, and I believe it was that goal he scored late in that game. And that gave him, I think it was like a 30, 40-point score. He was on about 60 at three-quarter time, so he wasn't going to score very well. But yeah, Fraser's one that everyone touted him to boost his scoring potential because he was playing that midfield role, but he hasn't really looked at all at home in that midfield position and not really confident around the ball. He doesn't really have any explosive pace, and he just looks really lethargic around there, maybe a little bit lost in that position. So yeah, Fraser has to go, I think. And what are your thoughts on Jaden Short? Obviously, I think, are you an owner, Nathan, I believe?
Yep.
Yeah, what are your thoughts on him? Because obviously he hasn't scored terribly at that mid-pricer. Let me just bring up the scoring here. Last week he actually turned up. I was, never really wanted to pick Short again for this reason where he kind of looks like every year he's going to pop up and average 100 plus with his, SuperCoach friendly role, and everyone was saying this year that you've got a whole bunch of youngsters in the side now. He's going to be the general down there. The ball's going to be in his hands quite often, and it's been that case for almost a half of footy, and that second half of footy kind of disintegrates a little bit. What are your thoughts on Jaden Short? Scores of 83, 71, 89, 86, 103. That 103 gives me a bit of optimism to how he's going to score in the future. But do you reckon this is more an anomaly, or do you reckon he's going to more gravitate towards that, 85 to 90 range? He averaged 82.1, and the seasons prior was averaging 98. What are your thoughts on Short? Is it time for him to go, or is he one that you can hold on to for the time being?
Yeah, well, I think so. I started with both Fraser and Short, so I guess I'm in a different position because I actually started with both of them. So, if you started with Roberts, then you probably ideally wouldn't want to get rid of him. Yeah, and I'm sort of doing that with Short. I'm sort of prioritizing getting rookies off the field, well, trying to anyway. Get rookies off the field before I worry about him. I mean, he's not setting the world on fire, but he's not doing horribly. If that makes sense, he sort of hasn't really changed in price either. He's only lost $4,800 from the start, his starting price. So he hasn't really gone up or down. So look, I mean, yes, it's frustrating. I was hoping he could push that average sort of back up into the mid-90s, given that I felt like the ball was going to be down in Richmond's backline a lot this year. So yeah, I think I'm just going to stick with him for the minute because I've got other priorities. But yeah, it is definitely frustrating. But as I said, at least he's sort of maintaining a consistent score. Even if he's not, setting the world on fire. Whereas I think Fraser, I think he just had to go because I think he was just gonna, sort of burn the money. So I think that's probably where I'm sitting with Short, in that, he's been pretty consistent with this score, and his break even is 72 this week. They are playing Gold Coast and Marvel. I would expect the ball to be in that Richmond defensive line quite a bit. So I'm hoping he can, sort of get around that 90 mark. And then, even though he's not in my side necessarily for cash reasons, he will have gone up on his starting price. So I think I'm just going to hold Short for the minute. He's not setting the world on fire, but he's not doing the worst either.
Yeah, I think if you had to rank, say, a Fraser, Roberts, and Short, you'd go Fraser definitely out, Roberts next, and then Short last, because we all kind of can be pretty confident that we're going to get a somewhat okay score from Short. I think if you wanted to get rid of him, probably last week was the time to do it. Now he scored that 100. He's lowered his break even a bit. He can reset and go again. And we all know he's capable of scoring pretty nicely. So it's one of those things where I think we just hold on to Short and see what happens. And if it goes to shit, it goes to shit. So moving on to our trade in target. So these are guys we're looking to bring in this week. Off the top of the bat, Caden Cleary and Tom Gross are two of the rookies that are kind of standing out as the obvious candidates. We'll talk about some others in a minute. But Caden Cleary, priced at 124.1k as a forward, break even to negative 73, has quite a tricky run with Port, Gold Coast and GWS with regards to solid opposition. But what are your thoughts on Caden Cleary? Is he a must trade in this week with kind of the lack of options around the corner for rookies? He seems to have taken over that Papley role quite strongly. We all know Papley's out for 6 to 8 weeks, so he's out for a while. Is there a risk that his job security is affected with the amount of players to come back in, or do you reckon he's sewn up that kind of small forward role quite nicely? I guess he seems to be very involved in the play, pushing up the ground effectively and being involved in those chains to scoring, and that's probably, correlated to quite a good 2-round average. But what are your thoughts on Caden Cleary? Is he a must this week?
Yeah, I think he's a must this week. Even if Papley comes back in 6 to 8 weeks, and it's probably going to be a straight swap. He probably will have done his job. He probably would have made it, a few 100,000. And there are probably a few forward rookies who perhaps it's time to get rid of. So if you're in my case and you've got I've got Neil Erasmus, but I've got a few other rookies, who had to go out before him. So yeah, if you've got like a dead rookie, or you've got a rookie who's probably going to start losing money, that's not Davidson. It's probably a good one to bring in, because even with that break even of minus 73, even if he gets, he's projected to score 49. And even if he gets 49, he's still going to go up 53,000. So that's going to push him up to 190,000. I think logically just bring him in. I think he has good job security probably until Papley comes back in. I think just, jump on and ride the Cleary train. And just hope he can sort of stick it out for us for the next 4 to 5 weeks. And he's probably going to be a good price in a few weeks to move him on for someone, who's a keeper.
Yeah, he's definitely shown quite strong scoring potential, and I think he's one that is quite involved in games. So he feels like he's not going to get that classic small forward where he just doesn't touch the ball and doesn't score goals. It doesn't seem like he's overly reliant on kicking, bags of goals to score well. Just bringing up his stats here from the last 2 weeks. I know he had a lot of tackles as well, so it seems to be quite that contested kind of small forward, pressure small forward. So 7 tackles against your mob this round, and then last round against North Melbourne, he also had 6 tackles. So there's a lot of tackle numbers, which is equating to quite a good scoring. Whether or not that's sustainable is kind of yet to be seen. But if you can kind of maintain around that, those numbers, those 15 disposals, couple tackles here, and he can add a few goals, then that's quite an impressive resume to kind of stay on your side. I think you're not relying on, a 3-goal haul and 6 disposals to score nicely. You're basically playing that more disposal contested style of footy, which is definitely beneficial to his scoring. But the next player on the list here, Tom Gross. Not sure if you know much about his name here, Nath, coming from Perth, coming from West Coast. But yeah, 113.5k mid only. So obviously Cleary was a forward. Break even of negative 65. I believe he scored 50 odd in his first round matchup against the Blues. Oh, sorry, so this week he scored 82 against the Blues, and then last week he scored, I think it was 51 or something like that against the Giants. 51, 17 disposals, 1 goal in that matchup there against the Giants. What are your thoughts on Gross? He has had quite impressive CBA numbers. I think I saw somewhere on Twitter that he was in that kind of 60 to 70% range. Definitely helps when your likes of Yo, Harley Reid, and then Tim Kelly gets dropped in that Carlton matchup. Do you reckon that this is a must-have as well, or is it a kind of a situation that if you can get both, or if you're forced your hand on one, then maybe prioritise a Cleary ahead of Gross? What are your thoughts on this one here? Because I think here he's definitely benefiting from the likes of Reid and Kelly not being there, and he's playing that CBA role quite nicely. But do you reckon that McWalter kind of keeps faith in these youngsters to get the job done, or do you reckon he'll eventually revert to, Yo, Reid, or Kelly, down the track when they're back to their best? Or do you reckon the West Coast looking towards the future right now and saying the likes of that, Clay Hall, Tom Gross get the experience in now whilst they're getting battered, regardless of who's in there?
Yeah, well, I guess this is the problem now. Is I don't know where West Coast are at, to be honest with you. Um, this speculation keeps mounting that Harley Reid's going to pack up, at the end of his contract next year. So, with that, Reid has been playing off the half-back line, given his fitness levels probably aren't to standard at the minute. So look, I mean, I think if you had to prioritize, I think Clear is definitely number one. And if you can get Gross in, then look at it. But I don't think he's a must-have because I just worry that West Coast side, are going to get, destroyed week in, week out. And yeah, I think Tim Cully will be back in that side this week. I know McMini wanted to make a statement and drop him, which is, completely fine. But, I think they need all the experience that they can get. And yeah, you don't leave, a big gun out for a second week in a row unless they're just absolutely horrible.
Yeah.
But then again, all of the West Coast players really haven't been that great. So, I feel like Cully probably will impact his scoring a little bit, which is why I said I think if you're going to do the order, I think Cleary would definitely be number one. And then if you can get Gross in as well, go for it. But if you're going to prioritise one of them, I would probably definitely prioritise Cleary ahead of Gross.
Yeah, no, I do agree there. I'm looking at potentially bringing in both in just to beef up some cash gem with some of the rookies not doing so well and being able to potentially afford a premium out of it. But number 3 on the list, Christian Petrarca. So he's an interesting one. Obviously, the reason why we put him on here is not because he's only mid-only. He's now a mid-forward. So that changes the game completely because obviously averages of a forward are expected to be a bit lower than midfield only. Like, obviously, if he's a midfield only, you would say don't touch him. But as a forward line option, you look at his score and it's actually not too bad as a forward. I know Chad Warner's another option playing now as a DPP mid forward. You got Nick Martin, as I mentioned before, as well. But what are your thoughts on Petrarca? He's, I think, as cheap as he's probably going to get unless he pumps out a really poor score. 483.2k with a break even of 101. Scored about that 95, 96 odd score this week against the Dons. 27 disposals for 96 SuperCoach points with 2 behinds as well. So that could have been quite a lot higher if he converted. But he has quite a nice matchup after Freo. So he's got the Tigers on that Anzac Day Eve game and then West Coast. What are your thoughts on Petrarca? Is it one of those situations where you look at Melbourne and go, I don't want to touch another Melbourne player? Or do you reckon this screams a lot of value for Petrarca, who we've in the past paid 600k plus for, and he's now at 480k and is eligible as a forward now? What are your thoughts on this one?
Well, I actually started with Petrarca this year, so as a bit of a point of difference, when he was a midfield only.
Start of the year.
So I did actually end up starting with him. So I was a little bit frustrated when I saw he got DP when he got the forward, because I think everyone's going to jump on him now. But yeah, I think as a forward, he probably is a bit of a saving grace because he probably was, to be honest, he probably was going to be on the chopping block later on in the year as a midfielder because he just wasn't cutting it as a midfielder. But now that he is forward eligible, I think that does change a lot of things from my perspective. I think I would be happy to keep him now as a forward for the rest of the year. Because I feel like the way he's scoring, like he's averaging 88, which isn't ideal. But then you look at the other sort of forwards around him and they're not averaging much better than that. So, I think that does change the game. But yeah, it's always good having a look at the DPP listings. Normally I do have a look through them and just see sort of who has been changed. So I actually wasn't aware that Petrarca got his eligibility until it got mentioned on this slide, which, I was a bit annoyed at because I've had him all year, but it is probably a blessing in disguise. Because as I said, he probably was going to be on the chopping block, but now that I can just move him into the forward line, he probably will stay there the whole year now, just as a forward.
Yeah.
In terms of things, so his break even's 101. Look, as I said, it's probably the same situation as with Henderson. In that, I think right now the place I would least want to be playing AFL football is in that Melbourne forward line. It is just an absolute disaster. But he is the one player down there who can get them going. So I don't think it's going to be against Freo, but I feel like Richmond and West Coast might be a few easy soft kills for him to hopefully sort of boost his scoring a little bit. Even if Melbourne don't win, I think he's probably going to score, quite well against those two sides.
Yeah.
I think like at 101, if he plays in the midfield, he probably might end up getting close to that. But yeah, I think he almost probably becomes a must consider just for the fact that he is a forward now. But yeah, there are a few other names who I don't have in front of me right now. But as I said, I probably should have checked the DPP changes before we started the podcast. But yeah, there's always probably a few interesting names who get given DPP eligibility, who do change the game. I think I heard you say Nick Munn's now a forward, which is very, very interesting. I think I would almost put Nick Martin ahead of Petrarca just for scoring. But yeah, obviously these DPP changes, they do really change the game. And perhaps in my situation, it's a bit of a blessing in disguise because it's probably saved me a trade that I didn't really want to do with Petrarca. But yeah, I feel like getting Petrarca in as a forward, probably just about any other year, you would probably say you're laughing and taking that all the way to the bank. But unless this Melbourne forward line can get going and improve, I feel like there could be better options that are now DPP eligible. As I said, I think Nick Munn being a forward now is a massive game changer. I feel like it probably just depends on sort of, how you're going to structure your buys and whatnot. It is definitely pleasing for my sake that Petrarca is now a forward. Because as I said, he was probably going to be on the chopping block for mine.
Yeah, it makes completing the forward line a lot easier than what it was probably a couple of weeks ago when you were stuck with, your McRae, Rankin, Horne-Francis, and then Bailey Smith, and that was about it. But now you look at Petrarca, Martin, even you can consider Dylan Moore now, considering that Will Day's out for 4 to 6 months. So there's definitely options there to finish your forward line quite convincingly. And I think Petrarca is going to be quite handy for a few super coaches out there that he's now forward eligible. But I know we're moving on to the 1 hour mark, so we'll quickly move swiftly on before we move to the VCC option. But I just want you quick, thoughts on Nick Dacos here. He's another option that we've put on there as an honourable mention. What are your thoughts on Dacos being a Pie supporter? Is he 100% locked to bring in or should bring in this week, or is he a chance to, hold on his weight? Because if you look at his score in isolation, yes, it was a very, very good score against Sydney with a Jordan tag, and Jordan didn't look like nowhere near chasing him. But after that, his opening round was 66, 98, 125 in round 2, had the bye, the 94, 134. So definitely, subpar for a uber premium like Dacos. But do you reckon he's now found his best form with the Pies, and do you reckon he's a must trade in this week, or do you reckon you can either almost wait one more week to see how he goes against the Lions, which is a very tough opposition there up at the Gabba?
Yeah, well, this is an interesting one. So obviously being a Collingwood supporter, I do get to see him firsthand every week when I play for him. And I think it really depends on his role in that side. So those lower scores, where he got the 66, 98 and 94, he's had to play more as a inside midfielder, which, yes, he can win contested ball, but it's not really showcasing who Nick Dacos is, which he is more of an outside player, he's sort of more of a first receiver, a second receiver, or the type of person who you actually want, the ball in the hands of to kick inside 50, as opposed to winning it at the source. And then you look in the two games that he has scored well against the Dogs and against Sydney. So against the Dogs, I'm pretty sure that the goal he played that night against the Dogs. Just let me get him up real quick. Yeah, so the goal he played against the Dogs that week, he sort of did more of that inside work. So it meant that Nick Dacos could go, more on the outside. And then last week, obviously, Ned Long had a breakout game, who basically did that the goal role anyway. So, I feel like, unfortunately for Nick, it is very much role dependent. But I feel like with the emergence of Ned Long, and getting back into that side, I'm hoping that the days of inside Nick are finished and he can become outside Nick, which is where he gets all his scoring from. So I feel like at his price, he's under 600k. His break even is about 115,
Yeah,
I
100,
think, or something.
121.
121 against the Brisbane side, who sort of don't really tag. I think I would be backing him in. Perhaps he can wait this week. But I think Anzac Day is a big game, obviously, for Collingwood and Essendon. They have a tagger, but as he showed on, Friday night, that he can just run all day. I feel like that you can perhaps wait this week, but I think you are going to want him in at some stage. So, I don't know how long he's going to be under 600k for. That's the only problem. If I could tell you it's going to score 150 this week, I would tell you get him in this week.
Mm-hmm.
But perhaps he can wait one more week. But I think I would want him in for Anzac Day, because I think it is a big game. He's a big game player. And last year, just correlation. I think last year he scored quite well on Anzac Day, just out of memory. Last year he scored 128 on Anzac Day. So, you're probably going to want him in for that. I feel like if you leave him this week, it's probably not going to hurt you too much unless he goes absolutely berserk and gets like a 180.
Yeah.
I think you definitely probably want to bring him in by Anzac Day. Because I think the longer you leave him out, if Collingwood start getting Degoe back in and Ned Long back in, and they keep playing the way that they have, I think he's just going to start, getting back to that sort of 2022, 2023 form, when he was literally just hitting targets left, right, and centre. So. That's sort of my thoughts on Nick. Is that I think you probably can afford to leave him this week, but I think you would want to be getting him in next week. I would almost have him as a number one trade target next week, just because of the fact that it's Anzac Day, and he does do well in big games.
Yeah, no, I 100% agree. I think within the next 2 weeks, it'd be very, very handy to pick him up. And then just quickly before you move on to the VCC options for round 6, Saad El Hawley, he's another option there that we briefly touched on. He's started the sub role there for pretty much all his games, I believe. He came on very early in that Essendon game last week because I think Nick Bryant was that suspected ACL, so had a much better run at it in that game against the D's. But he's an option there if you want it. I'd be surprised if you jump on this week just because you got Cleary and Gross ahead of him. He has that sub risk there, whereas the others probably not as much. Hawley's probably one that has shown he's got that scoring potential in that kind of friendly halfback role when he's on. But obviously, we've seen there that Brad Scott's not afraid to use him as a sub, and he seems to fit that sub mold very well. Very explosive player, comes on late and can cause some damage very quickly. So he's one that, even though he's priced, at that lower end of the rookie spectrum, and then has that DPP eligibility as well, I think you probably prioritise Cleary and Gross ahead of him. But moving on, before we wrap it up today, we've got obviously our VC and C options for this round. I'll quickly rattle them off. We've got Lockie Neal against your mob at the Gabba, 7:30 primetime Thursday night. I believe he's been incredibly disappointing for me as an owner, but I think if this is a game that he can step up, and this will be it. Previously 129 round 2 last year in that similar fixture, around the same time, as well. So Zach Merritt as well against West Coast. West Coast have just given up, bulk scores to midfielders just with how poorly they've gone. I guess the risk with Merritt there, with straight seeing him, is maybe the points get shared a little bit around every Essendon midfielder just because of how dominant opposition mids go to town on them. It's not maybe one specific midfielder, it's the whole midfield crew that kind of get a piece of the pie when it comes to SuperCoach scoring in that matchup. But yeah, previously 121 last year. And then Noah Anderson is a bit of a left field option if you have him as a captaincy. Wouldn't mind him against the Tigers. I know the Tigers with Camden McIntosh do a bit of a tag role there, or loose tag role per se, and Sarong was definitely impacted last week. It was Brayshaw and Sarong, and Brayshaw was the one that popped off. So maybe we have a similar conversation around Matt Rowell and Noah Anderson, which one of them pop off. But I wouldn't be surprised if Noah Anderson does really well against the Tigers at Marvel, and the Tigers don't really like Marvel as a ground historically. So I could see Gold Coast doing quite nicely there. Are there any other options there that you can think of, or any maybe avoids of captaincy and vice captaincy options that you can think of, Nathan?
Yeah, I think Anderson's the pick out of that one. I think that Camden McIntosh is actually going to go to Matt Rowell and try and limit his influence at stoppages, which I think will leave Anderson to get off the chain a little bit. So, yeah, I feel like all of them are viable. But, yeah, I think Noah Anderson probably is the one who I would be leaning towards as the captain. As for the vice captain, yeah, I don't think you can go wrong with, if you've got McCluggage or, Dacos or Neil, anyone
Brayshaw was another one against Melbourne, I guess, on that Saturday. I've just forgotten Brayshaw there.
Yeah, Brayshaw.
Against a depleted Melbourne side, that's an option.
Yeah, so perhaps there's some options. Are we doing the taggers, or is this the taggers one here?
No, I was mentioning just there. Is there any ones that you probably would avoid? C or BC potentially.
So again, I'm going to bring out some stats here. So over the last 2.5 years, so these are some player rating stats. So these are the players who I think opposition clubs should be targeting if they are playing these particular, opposition sides. So, Jack Sinclair, I would definitely be avoiding putting the vice captain or captaincy on him. So when Jack Sinclair's a top 5 rated player on the ground, so again, over the last 2.5 years, St Kilda have won 80% of their matches, and when he's not in the top 5 players on the ground, they've only won 30%. So that tells me that every week, whoever plays St Kilda, that their tagger has to go to Jack Sinclair and try and limit his influence. Caleb Sarong is the same boat. Again, when he's a top 5 rated player, Fremantle are winning 70% of matches. And when Sarong is not in the top 5 players, they're only winning 1 in 4 matches. So 25% of matches. So again, I think opposition clubs need to go after Sarong. There's just a few other guys on here. So Isaac Heaney is another one. Butters, Cripps. And LDU is the one at North Melbourne who might surprise a few people. So North Melbourne have only won, however many games in the last 2.5 years. If he hasn't been a top 5 player on the ground, they've only won once. So, I think that's going to help with Harry Sheezel. who is, in the list of players who sort of don't, it doesn't matter, if they're a top 5 player or not. So perhaps some players to look at going forward. Rosie, Zach Merritt is an interesting one. I can see he's on here. So he has basically no difference between, when he's a top 5 rated player and if Essendon are winning or losing. And then Harry Sheezel's the other one. So, and then there's just another couple on here. So Jordan Dawson's an interesting one. So if Jordan Dawson's a top 5 player, Adelaide have only won 5 times from 17 matches. And if he's not in the top 5, they're better than 50-50. So that's a bit of a reverse one there for Jordan Dawson, where Adelaide, where we want him to do well in SuperCoach, but it doesn't necessarily help out Adelaide. And the other player in the same boat, I don't know if he's really relevant this year, but Josh Kelly's actually in the same boat. So, again, when he's a top 5 player, the Giants are 50-50, and when he's not in the top 5, they're winning 7 out of 10 matches. So, they're just some sort of players to keep your eye on. That was from Full On Footy Analysis on Sports Day on SEN, where I got that stuff from last night. So, it's just for SuperCoach relevance. So probably Sinclair, Sarong, Heaney, and Cripps and Butters are probably sorts, are probably going to be, the players who opposition clubs need to go after to help them win the game. So I would be probably hesitant on putting it on them going forward. Unless, of course, the exception to the rule is if they don't have a defined tagger, or they're playing West Coast, because anyone seems to score well against West Coast regardless of who they are. But perhaps that's just something to look at going forward. Especially with Sinclair and Sarong, given that they're probably the 2 most SuperCoach relevant players. If they're not performing well, then generally their side doesn't win matches. So it would probably make sense for opposition clubs to go after them. But otherwise, in terms of, the real, or I shouldn't say the real, but, in terms of what we're talking about here, basically anyone from that Thursday night game or any one of those Friday games, I think are probably good value. I still think Sheezel, look, he hasn't been scoring well, but I think Good Friday, it's a big occasion. I think North Melbourne almost should be favourites for that game, if I'm being perfectly honest with you. I feel like he has to have a big game at some stage and get his season going. He's sort of been going without, setting the world on fire. Perhaps this is a week for Harry Sheezel, given that, just as we've touched on, I think Hewitt will go straight to LDU. So perhaps the line might not end up with a North Melbourne win. It might help with Harry Sheezel getting off the chain a bit. So, they're just some players sort of to keep your eye on going forward. With regards to perhaps who to look at with vice captain and captains. So perhaps there's some players who just need to be tagged purely because it's actually affecting them as a club if that particular player is getting shut out of a game, more so than SuperCoach, which unfortunately SuperCoach is just, a fantasy game, but the AFL is a real thing. And sides don't really care about their SuperCoach, how their players are going on SuperCoach. They're more interested in how their players are, are performing in a win or how they're not performing in a loss. So, I feel like that, these are probably some stuff to look at going forward.
Yeah, no, 100% agree. I think, what you say is completely right, but obviously you've got to look at the flip side there of which teams have a designated tagger and which don't. You look at maybe a Dawson or a Rankin might get attention, maybe from a Toby Bedford. Bedford did a really good job.
I think it's got to be Rankin.
Yeah, last week and nullified him completely. Maybe Melbourne have to look at potentially quelling a Sarong, even though Richmond got beaten regardless. I think a Sarong really can impact how Freo move that ball through the midfield into
if he doesn't do well, they're only 1 in 4 Freo of winning.
Yeah. And then I know what you mentioned about Sinclair is 100% true. I think if Sinclair does get tagged, St Kilda really get nullified with their ball movement. I guess that's probably a little bit less accurate with the rise of obviously Wanganeen Miller as an option there, and that kind of releases Sinclair into different roles where he can kind of avoid that tagger. But we saw there Bedford went to McRae ahead of Sinclair, so I guess that's how highly GWS rated McRae's ball movement in and out of the contest. But yeah, I don't think the Dogs have any designated taggers in that one, so I would suggest that Sinclair could score quite nicely in that matchup. Even though we saw that with the Dogs and the Lions game last week, there was a lot of SuperCoach points shared around different players. Obviously, Bontempelli might come back for that game on Sunday night, so there's one to watch out on. But yeah, definitely some very good options this round, and yeah, one to look out for, or to really define your score is really trying to target those high scaling captaincy scores moving forward. But before we wrap it up quickly, I'm just going to bring it back to my SuperCoach side just to give you an idea about what I'm looking at trading link this week before we wrap it up. So if I bring up my side here, look, as I said, I've just activated the boost because I was mucking around with trades. I haven't actually used the boost yet. So 3 boosts before this week, 2 if I use it this week. What I'm potentially mucking around with is Henderson. If I trade Henderson out to say, what's his name? Gross. And then I was wanting to potentially trade out another dunce rookie like a Campriali or something like that, but I think the money just doesn't work. So if Sardis doesn't get named again, potentially he goes to a Cleary via DPP to swap a Kako into the mids, and then Cleary gets picked. And I think I've just got enough money if I get rid of Davidson to a Petrarca. Oops. So that's an option there if I decide to do that. There, and that gives me 1,200 left in the kitty. So just enough to get that. Forward line is pretty much got 6 in there if you move Bailey Smith forward. Look, that's an option there that I'm contemplating. Another option is maybe just using the 2 trades and keeping Davidson for another week and potentially just, say get a Henderson off field for a Gross or a Cleary, and then using that money to upgrade Roberts. So if I trade out Roberts, I've got 594k, maybe a Naz or a Holmes comes into that spot there, gives me 4 premium midfielders, 4 premium defenders there. So that's probably the 2 options I'm looking at. But that's yet to be seen exactly which route I go in, and I guess that'll decision to be made down the track. With regards to Dacos, probably a little bit difficult to see how I get him in unless I use a boost and get, say, a Sardar Hawley in and DPP him through, but I don't think that's probably the smartest idea. So yeah, definitely interesting which way I'll go, but that's kind of where I'm looking at. But other than that, that's all we got time for today. I know it was kind of a beefy episode, but obviously lots to get through and lots to recap considering our absence for the first little chunk of the season. But hopefully moving forward, we can produce this weekly content and give our round recaps. Obviously, Nathan from more of a draft perspective, and myself on a classic perspective. And other than that, we'll catch you after Easter Monday.